Hello and welcome to livealittlehigher.com. This week we read Parashat Beshalach, and a very big part of the Sidra talks about the manna or the man. So what was the manna? The manna was this miraculous food that fell from heaven every day. It fell for the Jews for 40 years in the desert. It had the size of a coriander and it tasted like honey. It says that whatever taste you wanted it to be, it would also acquire that taste. Like if you were yearning for sushi, the manna would taste like sushi. So this food would fall every day, and people would have to go out of their tents and gather it. This was the job, the work, the avodah they had to do to acquire it. They had to go and acquire it, but really, they didn't have to produce it. The only thing they had to do was acquire it. And this was what kept the blessing coming, and a person would gather whatever it was his needs. Usually it says that it had to be an omer, it was a measurement for each person. If a person would acquire more than that omer, the manna would rot and worms would come out of it. But there was something interesting. On Shabbat, they would get a double portion of this manna and it would not rot. So we see that this food was completely miraculous. It's compared to the food of angels, and really the manna is a lesson for us on bitachon, on trust and on faith, that all our sustenance comes from heaven, comes from God. That everything you have, all the money you make, really you don't do it. It's not your job to make money. Your job is to acquire it, is to go and do something to be able to get it. But the amount of money that you're gonna get is already allotted to you by Hashem. So it doesn't matter if you work 20 hours a week, 20 hours a day, or 100 hours a week, that whatever you're gonna work, it's not gonna make a difference in how much money you're gonna earn. The amount that what you're gonna earn really is allotted to you from God, and this is a concept on faith in God, on the amount of money and the success that you are, because really the amount you make is not by your own means. It's a bracha, it's a blessing from God, it's a blessing that comes to you. And if we have this in consideration, then we will always be grateful and we will always be able to enjoy that blessing. But if we think that we are the ones that acquire it, that we're the ones that make it, that we're the ones that work for it, that we make our own money, then we're going to be hungry for it. And it's going to happen to what happened to the Jews that acquired more than what it was allotted to them. It's going to rot, and your life is not going to be a productive and good life. You're not going to enjoy it. So here the Shem Mishmuel gives us a new idea on the manna. Also he talks about a hidden trio and the connection between the manna, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Shabbat, and it's very interesting. And it says here that the journey from Elim and all of the congregation of the children of Israel came to the Sin wilderness, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th of the second month after the exodus of Egypt. And the Gemara expounds by saying that the day was Shabbat, as it says, in the morning you will see the glory of God, and in further says, for 6 days you shall gather it. So what it's telling us here is that the manna fell the first time for the Jewish people on Shabbat. And it's not a coincidence that the giving of the manna occurred on Shabbat. There must be an intrinsic connection between them. And indeed we find well-known connection between the manna and Shabbat. We eat lehem mishneh, 2 loaves of bread for each one of the meals on Shabbat. For the Friday night meal and the Shabbat meal at lunchtime on Saturday, we always put 2 loaves of challah on the table, and it is in remembrance of the two double portion that fell for the Jewish people for Shabbat. And we see here also that there is a big connection to Moshe Rabbeinu, as it says in the Tanis. It says the man fell in the merit of Moshe. So we know that there were 3 miracles that sustained the Jewish people on the 40-year or the journey in the desert. One was the manna, or the man, which came in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. Then we had the clouds of glory, which protected the Jewish people from the elements of the desert. And this came in the merit of Aaron HaKohen, the brother of Moshe. And we know that there was the well of Miriam, which was a rock that traveled with them in the desert, which gave them water wherever they were. And this miracle came in the merit of Miriam, which was Moshe and Aaron's sister. So Moshe was commanded by God concerning the manna. His merit brought it to Klal Israel, and he ate it himself. It's saying that he ate it himself. And this means that Moshe himself was surely intrinsically connected to the idea behind the manna. So now we have a three-way connection between Shabbat, the manna, and Moshe Rabbeinu. And how are they linked? So the father of the Shem Mishmuel, he used to say that Moshe was quite a mysterious figure. And as always, we may assume that the Hebrew name of a person it talks about the essence of that person. It gives us a deeper message about the person's nature. And Moshe himself was so spiritually developed that we actually know nothing about him at all. And he functioned at a completely different level from that of the rest of humanity. So Moshe Rabbeinu really was a very interesting person. There's never been someone like him, and as they say, from Moshe to Moshe, there's never been anybody like Moshe. So it's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu and Maimonides, that there's never been anybody like them. But in reality, like Moshe Rabbeinu, he's been like the epitome of perfection of a human being. So we see here that Batia, Pharaoh's daughter, who was the one that saved him when he was put in the Nile, she named him Moshe. She was the one that gave him that name. And Moshe means, I have drawn him out of the water. So there's a very interesting concept here, according to the Maharal of Prague. This verse is most revealing, and he explains that everything in the physical world starts like a homer. He calls it a homer, means a raw material, like wood, wool, or stone. These are raw materials in the world that exist, like wood. It's raw. Whatever you make out of it is what it's going to be useful for, but really it's raw. You cannot use it just like that. So today, to make that one of these materials useful, we impose something that is called a tzura, which means a form. So you have the concept of homer, which is a raw material, and the tzura, which is a form. Upon it, we make the wood into a bookcase or a table or a chair or something that is useful. And the tzura is a more developed, sophisticated entity, while the homer is raw and unchanneled material. So for example, water would be the perfect example of a homer. Water in itself does have no shape. So it's going to be shaped in whatever shape you make. If you put it into ice cube trays, you're going to make ice cubes. If you put it into a glass, it's going to take the shape of the glass. So it's going to shape whatever vessel is placed in it, spreading to fill the space available. So this concept has its parallel also in the spiritual domain. There's core spiritual underdeveloped things are associated with homer, while sophisticated and channeled things will be connected to tzura. So in spiritual terms, Moshe Rabbeinu was the most perfectly developed person ever to have lived. So every baby comes into this world as a homer. He's a raw material. He's given to you, and it's up to you to educate him, teach him, make him a mensch, and with the potential he has, and bring it out and teach him how to live up to who he is. That's the job of a parent. And also as an adult person, we also have a homer inside of us. We have potential, we have a raw material, and sometimes we have to develop it. So how many people in their older years, they realize, oh, I'm good at this, I'm gonna work on it, I'm gonna study it, I'm gonna learn it, and I'm gonna perfect it. So his personality was very tzura oriented. It was in the realm of using that raw material and making it useful, and the least homer inclined that is possible to be. So Moshe Rabbeinu was a person that lived up to his potential. He really lived up to the best of the best. So this is inherent in his name, and he was called Moshe because he was drawn out of the water. that it is totally and utterly separate from any trials of Homer, of which water is the epitome. So as he was divorced from normal physicality, his essence was unknowable, because a person that is in such a elevated state really is a person that we cannot comprehend. So the man, and it says here, why was the man so called, the manna? The verse tells us, the children of Israel saw, and each said to his brother, it is man, for they did not know what it was. It was also, the manna was something so elevated that could not be understood. And the Rashbam says, it is man, this world translates as what in Egyptian, for this was their vernacular. So the word man means what. Like they would gather it and say, what is this? So when Klal Israel saw the man, they could not express what they perceived. It was food of angels, as we saw above, something which that average person could not understand. We could not understand it. And it was then essentially a food described by the negative. Its very name means we don't know what it is. So the connotation of the food is a negative connotation because we do not know what it is. And it should be obvious that every creature, man or beast, requires food suited to its particular physical makeup. In general, the more sophisticated a being is, the more sophisticated the food becomes. So we see today that there's a lot of people that are vegan and kosher and all these things. The food becomes more sophisticated because the awareness of that person, the consciousness, it's growing, it's becoming higher. So from here we understand that the man, or the bread of angels as it's known, of course, Klal Israel received it in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was not that we deserved it, it was because of his merit we were able to be the beneficiaries of his merit. So adding Shabbat to the equation, the Shem Mishmuel, he tells us that if we look closely, we will see that this common factor is also apparent in Shabbat. Every Yom Tov has a name which clearly reflects its same content or historical origin. For example, Pesach, which means Passover, we're recounting the story of the Exodus, and it tells us about the history of the Jewish people in Egypt and how they were saved by God with the 10 plagues, and how the angel of death passed over the house of the Jews, and that's the context. So we have a historical context here, and we have also an aim, what God wants to imbue in us. Then we have, for example, Rosh Hashanah, which is the head of the year, and it's a day where we reflect on our life and we recommit ourselves to serving God. We have, for example, Sukkot, and Sukkot we dwell in sukkahs, in the booths, and also we're recounting part of the history of the Jewish people. So this pattern really is broken on Shabbat, whose name merely means rest. Shabbat doesn't mean anything else, it means to rest. But the name does not attempt to do anything else than that, and it does not explain to us what we have to do. So what one does on Shabbat, or anything about its historical roots. We don't recount the historical roots of Shabbat, we're not talking about how it was created, nothing like that. So all we are told is that Shabbat is a day on which one may not do melaha. We don't do anything that is constructive labor. The 39 melachot are the constructive labor that was done in the times of the construction of the temple. So those 39 things that were done while constructing the temple, like washing, separating, planting, all these things, we abstain ourselves from doing on Shabbat. So here we see, note that this is a negative definition because you cannot do this, you cannot do that. At the same time, it's also like the manna, which means what is this? It's also a negative definition. So Shabbat is a day on which one must not do something. And once again we see the unknowable aspect of our subject highlighted by its very name. So we see that it's more than we can know. So the manna, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Shabbat are three things that are supra-rational. They're higher than our intellect. And Hassal tells us that we cannot really understand the greatness or holiness of the Shabbat, for it is beyond our limited comprehension. We keep it, we enjoy it, we love it, but to understand it, it's in a different realm. So the gift of its reward is not given to be revealed, and it's a mystery. So here the inner connection between man, Moshe, and Shabbat is now clear. Each is unknowable in some very profound sense. So these three things are really unknowable. We cannot really comprehend them. And the links are now complete. The man was given on Shabbat via Moshe, who is himself described as the man-eater. For each is intrinsically connected to the other two. And these three entities portray the unfathomable in the three primary domains, which are time, space, and human soul. So Shabbat is connected to time, the man is connected to space because it was given in the desert, and Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the human soul. So to finish, we will note a well-known midrash. There's a midrash based on Shemot Rabbah, which says, Moshe saw that Klal Israel had no rest in Egypt, so he went to Pharaoh and he said, if someone owns a slave but doesn't give him 1 day a week to rest, the slave will die. So too, if you don't give your slaves 1 day a week to rest, they will die. And Pharaoh agreed, and Moshe selected Shabbat as that rest day. So from here, from this midrash, we see that Moshe was the one that selected the day for Shabbat. And he made this midrash, which he explains to Pharaoh, that if you don't give your servant or your slave 1 day of rest, he will die. At the same way, for us as human beings, if we don't have 1 day in which we stop any job, any constructive labor, and we just rest and we let it be, then our soul cannot flourish. So we may have assumed that Moshe chose Shabbos as he knew that this was God's chosen rest day. He knew this was the day that God chose, and this would have been the action taken by any great Jewish leader. So this is true, but it omits one factor. Moshe and Shabbat are intrinsically linked. Moshe Rabbeinu had to be the one who chose Shabbat as the day of rest for Klal Israel. He's the one that chose it. For he and it were forever linked. It was not by chance that he merited to commence the observance of Shabbat, as it was not by chance that he merited to bring the man to Klal Israel. So we know that after the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people started keeping Shabbos. So I leave you here. I wish you a beautiful week, and remember, live a little higher. Thank you.